Characters are important to video games. You probably knew that, I just didn't know how to start this video. You're probably wondering what the title means. Well, let me explain. So, characters in video games are obviously designed with a certain game in mind. Well, what happens if their first appearance ends up happening before the game they were designed for comes out? Yeah, this is surprisingly more common in games than you'd think. Characters making their first appearance before their intended debut, whether showing up in comics, or another game, or a show beforehand. So in this video, I'll be going over characters who appeared before their debuts, not including trailers and commercials because, well, then that would be every character. And where better to begin than with the big man himself, Mario. Or more specifically, his brother Luigi. It's common knowledge that Luigi made his debut in the March 1983 arcade classic, Mario Bros. He was designed for the game's co-op mode as a simple palette swap of his brother, like most multiplayer games of the time did. Hell, the earlier Donkey Kong games would just have two Marios show up, and you just had to accept that. So Luigi was designed for the arcade game Mario Bros, but 3 months before that came out a much different game of the same title, the Mario Bros. Game & Watch. An LCD game meant for two people. With such an early release date, this makes it the first Mario game to have a co-op mode. And you see that stick figure on the left? Well, that's Luigi. A little less green than usual, but hey, there he is, in his first video game. But if that Luigi isn't green enough for you, then why don't we jump ahead a whole 35 years to the Luigi's Mansion remake in 2018 with Gooigi. Released for the 3DS, despite the Switch already being out and dominating the market, this remake of the GameCube classic doesn't improve too much over the original in all honesty. Really, the only thing that needed fixing were the outdated graphics, which the 3DS couldn't do so well compared to the GameCube. But enough of my rambling. This game includes the debut of Gooigi, who Player 2 takes control of in the multiplayer mode. You see, Gooigi is a major character designed for Luigi's Mansion 3, which came out in 2019 for the Switch, but was already announced when the 3DS remake came out. He serves as a helper character there and is basically on par with Luigi in the plot, even appearing on the front box. But he would make an early debut a year sooner. Nintendo even acknowledged this, explaining on the game's official website that Gooigi was discovered by the modern Professor Egad, and sent back in time to help Luigi in the first game. It's a nice touch, and cool to see Nintendo still likes making goofy gaming websites. Now, jumping back to the 90s, and to one of the spin-off Mario games, we find ourselves at the Nintendo 64 classic Diddy Kong Racing. As of now, this is the only game where Diddy Kong stars and appears without Donkey Kong. No, instead of playing Sidekick, Diddy is joined by two sidekicks making their debuts, Conker and Banjo. You heard right, the Squirrel and Bear from Rareware's Golden Era made their debuts years before their own games came out. Now, this wouldn't last forever, as Rare was infamously purchased by Microsoft in 2002, meaning that when Diddy Kong Racing was remade in 2007, Conker and Banjo were replaced by Donkey Kong series staples Dixie and Tiny. And while it does suck to see them go, it does make more sense for them to be here than Conker and Banjo. Though someone who did stay in the game in the remake was the boss Tricky. Apparently this was going to be the same Tricky that showed up in Star Fox Adventures, which was also developed by Rare. But this connection was dropped, so Tricky barely escapes being a nominee in this video. But now that we've covered the Mario series, what about his former rival Sonic? Does he have any characters appearing before their debut? Well, yeah. The big man himself. Roughly 7 months before the release of the first Sonic game on Genesis, he appeared in the October 1990 racer, Rad Mobile. It's not the biggest appearance, in fact it's technically not him physically, but underneath the car's mirror, you can spy a small Sonic keychain. Yeah, a cool cameo that reminds me a bit of the cameos in Shenmue. I really wish there was more info on this game's development. I'd love to know why they decided to put Sonic in here, but Sonic isn't the only character from his series we'll be talking about here. Believe it or not, the next character we'll be talking about is Tails. You see, Tails was designed for Sonic 2, but made his debut in Sonic 2. Okay, let me explain. It's basically the Luigi situation all over again. So, there are two different versions of Sonic 2. Okay, fine. There are two completely different games named Sonic 2 that released in the same month. Tails was designed for the Genesis version of Sonic 2, the main one that pops up into your head when I say Sonic 2. He follows Sonic around during the main campaign and is even a playable character. Sonic 2 on Genesis was notably one of the, if not the first game to release worldwide within a week, coming out in Japan November 21st, 1992, and for the rest of the world on November 24th. But earlier that same month, Europe was introduced to a much different version of Sonic 2. The Game Gear version. While it shares its name and general gameplay with the main version, this is very much its own game with different levels and its own plot. Here, instead of following Sonic, Tails has been kidnapped and has to be saved from Robotnik's clutches. Now, I do want to point out that when I say this game came out before the Genesis version, that was only true in Europe. In Japan, it came out the same day as its 16-bit counterpart, and a month later in North America. However, I found conflicting sources for when exactly the European version released. Some sources said it came out the first week of the month, while others said that the Game Gear version beats the Genesis version by one day. But in any case, the Game Gear version released first, and by technicality, is Tails' first appearance. Alright, let's get a little more simple. Cream the Rabbit is an interesting example. The character made her proper debut in Sonic Advance 2, which establishes itself as the first time she met Sonic and friends. But a month earlier, concept art of her showed up in Sonic Mega Collection alongside a trailer for Sonic Advance 2. Okay, that does border the no trailers rule, but I got one more thing for you. Cream was originally designed for Sonic Heroes. So technically her showing up in Advance 2 is an example for this video. And it's funny too, because Cream appeared in 4 games, if you include Mega Collection, and Sonic X before she appeared in the game she was created for, probably making her the most extreme example of this. Damn it, I said things would be simple. Hey, quick side note, while I was editing this video, I remembered that Cream shows up in the GameCube version of Sonic Adventure, so add that to the list of games she showed up in before Sonic Heroes. But going from one wacky animal to another, we have the Crash Bandicoot series and its characters. Crash Twin Sandy is a rather underrated gem in the Crash Bandicoot series. Sure, it's not one of the Toys for Bob or Naughty Dog games, but it's a solid platformer that manages to hold its own with good level design and a unique a cappella soundtrack. One character designed for this game was Nina Cortex, the demented niece of series antagonist Dr. Neo Cortex. While designed for Twin Sandy, she would end up appearing as a boss in Crash Bandicoot Purple on the Game Boy Advance months earlier. Although she acts much differently, talking like a baby and being much less vile, almost as if it's not the same person. And well, there is a reason for this. Vicarious Visions developed Crash Purple while Traveler's Tales made Nina while developing Crash Twin Sandy. Vicarious Visions simply took Nina's design and used it, without context or permission from the other studio, leading to Nina's odd debut, though you could even argue that this wasn't her proper debut, as just weeks before Crash Purple released, the now lost Flash game Crash Bandicoot and Spyro Adventure World will be released online, with Nina making a cameo. Okay, I'll admit this is really pushing my rules because this is really just an advertisement shaped like a game. There's not much else to say about the Crash series, but I would like to note that the newest game in the series, Crash Team Rumble, introduces a new character named Cat-Bat. While new, they did make a small cameo in Crash Bandicoot 4's ending. A character for a future game making a cameo in the previous game's ending isn't something only done by the Crash series. Street Fighter did something very similar in its 4th entry. In Balrog's ending, the usually selfish boxer is seen going through the remains of the fallen Sin headquarters. While there, he stumbles upon a young boy and decides to help him from the wreckage. It's an oddly touching moment for a character defined by his greed and selfishness. And by the time of Street Fighter V, the boy Ed is now all grown up, with Balrog acting as something like a father to him. Ed is slated to come out as DLC for Street Fighter VI. Looking forward to it. But going back to Street Fighter V, it's time to talk about its final DLC character, Luke. Who is Luke? Well, he's the main protagonist of Street Fighter VI, designed for Street Fighter VI, only important to the story of Street Fighter VI. So why the hell is he DLC in Street Fighter V? Well, he's basically a walking ad for the next game in the series. I'm not even joking, according to a Game Informer interview with Capcom's Takayuki Nakayama, they consider Luke a Street Fighter VI character making a guest appearance in Street Fighter V.
I talked to them about that. I asked Nakayama about that. It's like, oh, you know, the final DLC character of Street Fighter V is the main protagonist of Street Fighter VI.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, you know, we kind of looked at him internally as a guest character instead of like a Street Fighter V DLC character.
They even altered his design to make him look younger. It's an interesting choice, really. Like, imagine if in, like, I don't know, like, at the end of Super Mario 3D World, Cappy just showed up as a playable character in the final level. Now, Street Fighter isn't the only fighting game series that fits this video. Don't believe me? Just look at Roy showing up in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, which was the first Fire Emblem game to feature Roy, had a concurrent development with Super Smash Bros. Melee. To help spread hype for the game, series director Masahiro Sakurai decided to include Roy as a character. However, as the game was late in development, the red-haired boy would have to settle with being a clone of Marth from the same series. Melee would end up releasing in late 2001, while Fire Emblem The Binding Blade saw a 2002 release, meaning that Roy made his worldwide debut in Smash Bros., making him the only playable character in the series with this distinction. Also, another thing people don't mention is the fact that a Fire Emblem manga featuring Roy came out before Binding Blade did, meaning Roy showed up in Smash Bros. And the manga before his game debut. I don't have a transition, I'm gonna talk about Star Wars now. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is often considered one of the best, if not the best game in the Star Wars series. Hell, it's even the fastest selling Star Wars game of all time. Well, as of now. It came out in September of 2008 for basically every major console at the time, even the N-Gage. In this game, you play as Galen Merrick, codenamed Starkiller, who serves as the personal assassin to Darth Vader. Now, Starkiller was obviously designed for The Force Unleashed. He's not mentioned in any movie beforehand. Hell, you're probably thinking that he made his first appearance in some obscure expanded universe comic, show, or book. Well, not exactly. It's, Soul Calibur 4. Yes, Soul Calibur is no stranger to the odd guest character or two, but I don't think anyone imagined that Star Wars characters would show up in Soul Calibur 4. Joining Yoda and Darth Vader, two of the most iconic Star Wars characters of all time, Starkiller made a playable appearance in Soul Calibur 4, but he's only called the Apprentice here. And Soul Calibur 4 came out about 2 months earlier than The Force Unleashed. A very odd marketing choice to say the least. But hey, I guess it worked. Like I said before, The Force Unleashed is the fastest selling Star Wars game and has a huge following, and Soul Calibur 4 is one of the best selling games in that series. Now, sticking with Star Wars, I have a small example for you, or big depending on how you look at it. LEGO Star Wars is a classic 2000s game, and the very beginning of the LEGO game franchise. Now, this first game covers Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3, but came out a whole 47 days before episode 3 came out. So really, the entire third movie's set pieces and debuting characters that show up in the game fit the bill for this video. And it shouldn't be surprising that Star Wars managed to have a few examples here. After all, it is such a huge franchise, the 4th highest grossing in fact. But what about the highest grossing media franchise of all time? Well, that would be Pokémon, and it has a lot of examples. I mean, are you surprised? The series has over 1,020 Pokémon at this point, and that's not even including alternate forms. And there is so much media in the franchise, from the core games to the multiple anime, many manga, the trading cards, and so much more. You can bet at least one Pokemon a generation is getting an early debut. But for the sake of keeping things organized, I'll mainly be talking about this from a game perspective. So just to inform those of you who don't know, Pokemon is split up every few years by generations. Each generation follows a multitude of new Pokemon in a new region of the Pokemon world. Each generation is formed by the anime and 2 types of games, the main series and spin-offs. Pokemon are designated to a generation by which main series game they first appear in. For example, Togepi is considered a Generation 2 Pokemon because they were designed for and made their first main series appearance in the 1999 games Pokemon Gold and Silver. This is despite the fact that Togepi's first Pokemon game was the Generation 1 spin-off game Hey You Pikachu, released in 1998. It actually used to be very common for Pokemon of later generations to first appear in an early generation spin-off game, and this happened until Generation 4. Another example would be the Pokemon Munchlax. Munchlax was made for Generation 4, which began in 2007, but first appeared in the 2004 racing game Pokemon Dash, a whole 3 years beforehand. Bonsly is a similar example. It's a Generation 4 Pokemon that first appeared in the 2005 spin-off Pokemon XD and was even playable, making it the only Pokemon playable in a generation before it was introduced. And Munchlax also cameos in this game. The 2006 games Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team also feature statue of Generation 4 Pokemon, including Weavile, Mine Jr., and Lucario. And Munchlax also appears in this game. Really, it's tying with Cream with how many appearances it's making. Now I'd like to talk about a few examples of Pokemon debuting in the anime before their game came out. There are many examples of this, so I'll only be saying a few. Perhaps the most popular is Ho-Oh showing up in the very first episode of the anime. Togepi made their anime debut in episode 50, Who Gets to Keep Togepi? Blaziken showed up in Pop Goes the Sneasel, Weasel and Chatot first appeared in the movie Pokemon Ranger in the Temple of the Sea, and finally, for now, Go-Goat first appeared in the Journalist from Another Region episode of the Black and White anime. Like I said, this is only a few examples, but there are quite a few more. Now that we've covered the biggest gaming examples, I'd like to bring up some movie examples. So, you know how it's common for games based off movies to exist? Well, in the 90s to all the way in the 2010s, I found quite a few examples of tie-in games coming out before the movie it's based on, making these the technical first appearances of these movies' characters. Like, did you know that the Game Boy Color version of Toy Story 2 came out in North America 2 days before the movie hit theaters? Or how about the Emperor's New Groove game? It came out on the PS1 nearly a month before the movie came out. Finding Nemo's console version takes the cake by a few days. The Game Boy Advance and Color versions of Monster Inc. beat their movie by a few days. The SpongeBob movie game is an interesting example. So it came out 3 weeks before the movie did, and is such a gem of its era, really. While the main characters are from the SpongeBob cartoon, newcomers Mindy and Dennis technically make their debut in this game. Hell, Dennis notably uses an earlier design than the one he had in the movie. Both Madagascar 1 and 2 had its games come out before their movies, but the third one avoided this. The 3DS game Frozen, Olaf's adventure also beat the movie, meaning that Olaf is the true main character of the franchise. You can't change my mind. You know, when I started researching this video, I did not expect there to be so many characters who appeared before their intended debut. Like, I thought this would be a 4-minute video talking about Roy and Super Smash Bros. But here I am over 15 minutes later and I talked about a whole load of games from licensed garbage to esports staples. To end off this video, I would like to crown Cream and Munchlax as our king and queen of this video, with both appearing in multiple games in their respective series animes before making their intended debut. And I would like to thank you for watching this dumb video. Please, like the video if you enjoyed, or feel free to dislike, and if you would like to see more, please subscribe. Or don't, the choice is yours. Also, if you can think of an example, please let me know in the comments. There's definitely at least 1 or 2 more that I didn't mention that definitely exist, or maybe even more than that.